Hello, my name is Jacob Mullins, and on this part of my website, I'm going to be looking at the data from my pre and post test to analyze the data to help me improve my instruction and the student learning in this individualized unit for volleyball. Now, for today's purposes, I'm only going to be looking at one skill and breaking down the data for that skill. So the skill I'm going to be using, if you look up here in the corner, is the underhand serve data pre-test. And in this, of course, the two columns here, what is your name? That will be the assessor. What is your partner's name? That's the person being assessed. So this is going to be a student, a partner peer observation. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas that I'm looking at. Those are based on the learning cues on the rubric for these students. And you can see, I won't read each one of these, but you can see the different learning cues that they're trying to meet. These scores are based on a 1, which is rarely, 2, sometimes, 3, almost always, and 4, always. Now, all of these will combine for a maximum possible total score of 20. So if you look over here in this column to the right, that gives the total score that these peers assess their partner. So here you see the out of a maximum possible 20, this student got 11, this student got 18. So what I'm going to do is I want to answer a few questions here. The first one being, what was the average score for the skill for this class or group of students? And if you look over here, that's their total score, and the class average is going to be 10.3 out of a possible 20. The range on this assessment, I would put these numbers right here, their total score in order from greatest to least, and I'm going to look at the difference between the greatest number, which is 18, and the lowest number, which is 5, to get a range of 13 on the pre-test. What's the lowest score for this skill? As you can see, we talked about that already. 1 is rarely. And I have just a few kids on this assessment that were receiving 1s. That means that they rarely perform these skills. What's the highest score for these skills? It's going to be a 4, which means they're always doing it. So every time that you see that the kid do these different skill sets, they're always doing it. And you can see that there's not very many 4s. Most of mine fall between the 2 and 3 score range, which is sometimes and almost always. How many students scored in these areas? Well, with the rarely, you can go down through here and you can see Cannon scored rarely on a couple of them. Billy down here has quite a few rarelies. And then I have Chuck that has a few rarelies down here. Well, in fact, 4 out of the 5 are rarely. As far as 4s, you won't see a whole lot of 4s on the pre-assessment. That's not to say that they're not always going to be there, because here Jake has 4s in 3 of the 5 areas. There are some 4s in that, but most of the time you're going to see more 4s or the higher scores in the post test, because you got to remember at the beginning you're looking for what these students are able to do, because that's going to direct your instruction. As you've seen throughout my website, the biggest thing that we're trying to work on here is individualizing the volleyball unit for each student, for each learner. We want to individualize that learning. So typically, if they're receiving 4s on the pre-test, there's not going to be a whole lot of growth for those students because they've already mastered those skills. But the ones with the 1, like the Cannon and the Billy here, those students can show the greatest amount of growth throughout the unit because they have farther to go. Okay, I hope that everyone can see that. Now, what does this data on this pretest tell me about the student's readiness to learn? Well, the pretest tells me that these are 7th grade students, so they're ready to learn. Now I just have to individualize that instruction for them. And I'm basing this off of the pretest and their partner's assessment of them. Now, this isn't the only assessment tool that I'll use, and I have demonstrated and given examples throughout my website of other assessments that I use, but this is a really good one to get students involved and to help them prepare for the upcoming unit. So now, understand the pretest is given before there's any type of instruction. So these students some of them may come to you have already played volleyball outside of PE. Some of them may have never played it. So a lot of these scores right here, they're not really indicative of where they're at. A lot of it's just what they know, okay? Now, if I click down here to post-test, you'll be able to see how these students did at the end. So the pretest is at the beginning of the unit. The post-test will be at the end of the unit. Once again, I'm going to use the same assessment. I'm going to use the partner assessment to go through the same. And if you go through each one of the same learning targets up here at the top, from the rubric that I used earlier, you'll see 4 always is the best, 1 is not as good, it's the least, okay? 4 means always, 3 almost always, 2 means sometimes, and 1 means rarely. And if you will look at my 10 students in each one of the columns, you'll notice that there are no 1s. All of the students improved. But like I was saying before, if you'll recall on the pretest, and I'll click back on it right here, we'll use Jake for an example. Jake was on the pretest, on the first column was always, the second almost always, third almost always, 4 always, 4 always. So you can see he totaled 18 out of the maximum possible 20 points in the pretest. If I click back over here to the post-test, you'll notice you go through these, he is still at the same spot. Like I said before, he didn't have a whole lot of room to grow because he'd already mastered a lot of these skill sets before the instruction occurred. Does that mean that he didn't learn anything? Absolutely not. It just means that based on this assessment, he already had the skills and the tools that he needed to be successful in our overall goal for this unit. Now, you take a student like Cannon, and I will go back to the pretest here on Cannon. You see he was a rarely, sometimes, rarely, and sometimes, for a total of 8 out of a maximum possible 20. If we go to the post-test, you look, he improved in every column and moved all the way up to a 15. So that's showing tremendous growth there. Tremendous growth. And in fact, my lowest on the maximum possible on the post-test, if you'll recall, the range was 13 in the pretest. The range in the post-test is only 9. So we go from the highest, which was a 20, to the lowest, which was an 11. That range is just 9. So we've increased that. And the class average moved from a 10.3 to a 15.1. So you can see there's tremendous growth. And you can see how this data is there for anyone to see. You have it right in front of you. It's really easy. You know, the hardest part is setting it up, but once it's set up, you just put the numbers in. Excel does a lot of the class averages. You see down here the scores for each column. It does that for you. So it's just setting this up to begin with. So like I said before, I like to put in an extra sheet here. It just has the name and partner, but it shows the pre-test total out of 20, and the post-test. So I can see right here really quickly how much improvement each student had. And if you look, the students that scored the highest, they, like I've said before, they weren't able to show a whole lot of growth based on these post-tests, but that's because they already knew a lot of these skill sets. Then you look at some of the weaker students, Billy here that scored a 5 in the pretest, he jumped all the way up to a 13. You see Cannon here with an 8. In the pretest, he moved to a 15. 6 to a 13. So you're showing tremendous growth, and this is a great tool to have to show administrators or to show parents exactly how students are doing. Now, based on the data that I received from this a group of students for this skill, how will I use this data to help me design lessons that meet the needs of every single student? That's one of the things that we've worked on this unit, is individualizing for this website the learning for all students. And that's really simple. I'll use these pretest scores here, and what I will use those for is to help me, if you'll remember back as we went through the unit, if you go back through my website, the challenges that we set up, those are daily activities. If the student like Chuck scored rarely on one of the target challenges, task challenges that he will use will be at a beginner level. Now, someone like Jacob here that has 4, he's going to move to a more complex challenge. So I'm challenging each student to improve the skill sets that they already have, with the goal of having the goal of my overall unit objective, to have the students be able to compete in a modified volleyball game. So using this data will drive my instruction and will drive the lessons that I design for each student. I hope that this website and this data analysis has helped you and will help you improve your instruction. That's the reason we designed it. Thanks. Bye.